Yeah. And I obviously appreciated the shout out on the Mind Pump podcast. That was just to be mentioned on that was super cool. So I can only imagine what it was like to do it.
Well, the thing is, I've talked about, you say how GLP-1 medications are a tool to level the metabolic playing field. I've said it multiple times. Every time I say it, I make sure to credit you for it because it's really just the best. It's the best way to put it for people who don't understand what these medications do.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like what I feel like I've been doing for the last couple of years is just like find ways to say things that stick with people so that they can grab onto, kind of big concepts and ultimately take that and either evangelize themselves and feel like they're better equipped because they have their head around it, or to just talk to their doctor. And so I appreciate that because when I hear that, it's like, hey, what you're doing is making an impact, and that's the most meaningful thing that I could hear. So I appreciate that. One of the things that I thought was super interesting about you, like the first time you reached out to me, is you're like, hey, I'm going on this podcast. Here's my journey. All of a sudden I'm going to do this, but like hearing a little bit of your background and like what you do in your daily life, I don't know that this really, I mean, it's an amazing thing to go do the Mind Pump podcast, but I have a feeling that that's kind of a small blip on the radar in terms of like, you just seem like a kind of guy who has a lot of really cool experiences. So how does that rank with, well, first of all, like for people who will be watching this, can you just kind of explain like to the level that you're comfortable what you do in your daily life for work and some of the experiences that you've had there, and like how this Mind Pump thing and GLP-1 exposure and explosion has kind of ranked on that?
Yeah, no, it's very cool. I mean, my background has been in business and politics. Just for those who, the vast majority don't know who I am, a few years ago, 3 years ago, I was 652 pounds. I've been really big. I've been, well over 500 pounds for most of the last 25 years. And, tried to lose and did lose a few times, but regained because for all the reasons that everyone struggles with it, because I have a disease called obesity and I wasn't treating the disease. I was just temporarily working through it. But so over the last 25 years, I've worked in business. I've worked for Amazon for almost 20 years.
Wow.
I left that after COVID because I was working 80 hours a week, and that job was just, I love Amazon. I love my job, but that job was killing me during COVID. I had to leave. And after
Was it a
that,
moving around? So at
yeah,
that time, were you 650 pounds?
I was, yeah. So I was at the beginning of COVID, I was probably around 575, 600. And then I was working from home most days and not moving at all. And I was working, I mean, literally, I was working 80 to 90 hours a week. And
Mm.
so all I was doing was just ordering food, getting food delivery, pizza, stuff like that, and not moving. And so I'd always had obesity, but it just really exploded during COVID.
Yeah, not an uncommon story. And I think I've heard you say before, you don't have kids and you don't have pets. And so no kids and no pets during COVID meant like, what else are you going to do
Yeah.
besides eat? I think for a lot of people in your situation, that was probably the norm.
Well, it was, and with social distancing, I right before COVID, I'd been living in England for about 3 years. I'd gone over there for work, and I was leading a number of teams throughout Europe. But I didn't really know anyone over there. I knew I was going to be there temporarily, so I didn't make a real effort to make a bunch of new friends because I thought, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to see a lot of these people ever again.
Yeah.
And so I kind of joked when social distancing started with COVID, I was fully prepared for it because I'd been social distancing for the previous couple of years
Sure.
in many ways. I mean, I'd been out in the public, but just hadn't been close to anyone. And so then I realized that that combination of being sort of isolated in Europe for a while and then coming back and within a few months being isolated with COVID and working so much was incredibly difficult for me. And so I'd gained, I've
Yeah.
already been big. I'd gained quite a bit of weight during COVID.
You seem like the kind of guy who thrives off of relationships and human interaction. I mean, I've seen enough of your TikTok lives that I know, like, it seems like, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it seems like it gives you energy to interact with people and be around people. Am I accurate in saying that?
I think that's totally accurate. I mean, my entire professional career has been leading people. I've managed thousands and thousands of people over the years. I've worked in politics both as a paid, as a profession and as a volunteer, which is a very social environment. And I'm definitely extroverted. And so it was a real challenge when I think many people experience this when they get significantly overweight or obese is I stopped being social.
Yeah.
My mobility suffered so much that I wasn't getting out. I was finding excuses not to see friends or family, which is just sort of this vicious cycle of making things worse. But it
Yeah.
was also a mental component for me because the thing that I thrive on, which is just I love making connection with people and getting to know people, and that just stopped. I mean, that became to a standstill in
Yeah.
large part due to my weight.
Don't you wish you would have known about TikTok and YouTube to a lesser extent, but the TikTok, there's something special about a TikTok live because there's so much interaction in those lives. Don't you wish that you would have known about it you can see how it
Yeah.
exploded during COVID.
Well, I mean, I was on TikTok during COVID. I was
Were you?
not posting anything. I was just scrolling. I wasn't
Yeah.
interacting. I was just scrolling. So like, Dave, I feel like a creeper. I've been watching you for years. Uh, and I've only started, interacting and posting on TikTok or Instagram recently.
Mm.
And I just have to kind of say that you really are a hero in the space, and for a few reasons. And I know you're not having me on to have me like do this, but you have to like give me a little forbearance to say this on behalf of the community out here. Uh, the vials were all released yesterday. I don't know when this will air, but it was very recently when these were released. And that was you. I know you're going to say you didn't do it alone, and you're right, you didn't do it alone, but you started that.
Mm.
That eventually became a snowball that
Mm.
has pressured these companies to at least make them somewhat more affordable. And I know the next challenge is making them actually affordable.
Yeah.
But you've been a hero this entire time for me personally,
Mm.
even though I haven't been posting about it. You were
Mm.
very much encouraged me to get started on GLP-1s, and I'm happy to talk about that journey. But you were a major part of my doing this, and just as proof that I've been following you for so long is I know that during this process for you, these medications didn't always work for you very well when it came to weight loss, and you used to talk about that. I don't know if you have recently, but um, the fact that, and I know that they're treating your diabetes, but the fact that you have become such an advocate for a treatment that wasn't always the best treatment for you just
Mm.
speaks to your character. Because many
Mm.
people, if they said, well, this isn't really working for me the way it is for everyone else, I'm going to give up, or I'm not going to advocate for it. But the fact you kept at it just says a lot about who you are as a person, as a man, as a human being. So I just want to say, on behalf of the community, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm having to learn how to receive these kind words, which are gifts, and so I want to say thank you for your kind words, and I'm receiving them, and it means a lot to me because as you and anyone who has been following me for any deal of time knows, I've put a tremendous amount of my life into this. And it's not always been, maybe as noble as you've painted it. I think part of what's kept me engaged, Jamie, is just, what gets me excited is the future of these medications for people like me who the current ones aren't it. So I think that has helped to keep me engaged. But I would also say that when you are given a platform, and I very much believe that OnThePen was given to me, in the sense that people have to receive what you're saying and receive you and accept you, in order to build a community. And I feel like everyone has given that to me. Um, and so I think there's a great deal of what I would say, there's an urgency for me to treat that well. And so I know that um, many people hear the content that we put out, and it does move the needle for people. And you can only hear so many stories about lives, and we'll get into your story about lives that have been changed and transformed. One of the phrases I use on the pen all the time is getting your life back. It's like you can only hear so many stories about people getting their life back before you're like, everyone needs to be aware of this. And the more I got into it, the more I realized there is an uphill battle to get the world, even people living with obesity, and sometimes I would say especially people living with obesity, to realize it is a chronic relapsing disease. It is not a state that you simply chose for yourself. It is a disease that involves biology and very scientific things that are hard for lay people to understand. But once science started treating obesity as a disease, which is why I so respect the work of the Obesity Society and the Obesity Action Coalition, once they did the yeoman's work to get the scientific community to start to understand, like, this is a disease and it can be treated. Once that started to happen, and once the public dollars were put behind tackling it and understanding it, now we're sort of living in this advent of treatment. And so I very much see it as an exciting thing. Some people think we've arrived. Like, I feel like this is still the frontier
Absolutely.
of obesity medicine. And that does get me excited, because there's a whole generation coming behind us. And especially with the way that AI is advancing and everything, like, people are going to more and more be sitting for a living, and much like I have for the last 10 or 15 years of my life. And that doesn't help the problem of obesity. So we have to continue to learn more about how it works in order to treat it well. And so while it seems like a noble pursuit, maybe from the outside, there have definitely been things that have motivated me, just the excitement of it and the prospect of getting one day the treatment that I will need, as things that have sort of externally motivated me. So I appreciate you sharing all that. I do want to get into your personal story. So I've talked to a handful of community members who started off in those higher weight categories, 600 or 700 pounds. And I think even, there's some parts of our story that I can change, and I can understand that I can not change. There's some parts of our story that I can empathize with and understand. And then there are others that I know that I cannot, because I never lived that. Tell me, how long did you live in a 500 to 600 pound plus body? And what kind of impact did that have on your daily life? Because it doesn't seem from the outside like it really slowed you down that much, but certainly there was a tax that you were paying.
Yeah. I started gaining weight when I was 9 or 10 years old. I went to my grandparents' place over the holidays, and they had a refrigerator in the garage. And my sister and I never really drank soda before this, and they was stocked full of soda. And
It's
we
funny
were,
that you say that. My grandparents were the same way.
yeah,
They had a fridge in their garage, and it was full of soda, something we never had in our home. This
yeah.
would be a
So
grandparent thing.
yeah, and so my grandparents, loving grandparents, are like, anytime you want something, well, it's like giving the keys to the castle to me. And so
For sure.
I, over that few weeks, I became totally addicted to those sugary drinks, to the sodas, and certainly gained weight as a 9 or 10 year old at that point. But what really changed is I agree. I think obesity is a disease. I think some are more predisposed than others. And I think it's the combination of the disease and the food environment that
Yeah.
make it so difficult for some. I suspect that obesity has been a disease since the dawn of humanity. But the difference now is that we have a refrigerator in the garage full of
Right.
sugar,
Right.
and that never existed before. And so after that, I stopped spending my allowance money on baseball cards and started buying, you know, Mountain Dew and Coke and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I began gaining weight throughout high school. It's probably through almost high school, maybe 350. So big, but not, in an extreme end. And then went to college, gained weight in college like many do, turned 21, started going out with friends. And it wasn't so much the drinking that caused me to gain weight in my 20s. It's after the drinking, let's go to a fast food place or let's go to a truck stop, and just continue to sort of gain weight. So I was over 500 when I got to about 20-ish, right around there.
Mm.
And then began working for Amazon, great career there for many years. Uh, but with that, what would happen is once I was about 33, 34, I'm 46 years old now. I began moving a lot for work. So I moved to Kentucky, to North Dakota, to Eastern Washington, to Seattle, to London, England, to back to Washington. And every time I moved, it was I was sort of lonely. I didn't know a lot of people. I was just, using, like many of us do, I was eating out of emotion. And what eventually happened for me is it didn't matter what the emotion was. If I had a really sad day or a bad day, I'd mourn by eating. If I had a great day, like the first thing I think about is like, what can I eat tonight to celebrate? If I was bored or lonely, and it just became a part of my life throughout this entire process. In terms of how it affected my life, it always affected my life. It made me a little slower, not as mobile. But once I got to probably around 2015, 2016, how old would I have been at that point? About 36 or so. I lost a lot of weight using a medical weight loss program at the local hospital, where it was essentially using meal replacement shakes and bars, and this is all under the guidance of registered dietitians and doctors.
What can I? Do you
Yeah,
mind saying what it was?
I used OptiFast is what it was.
Okay, I used a similar one around that same time, maybe a little bit later, called Profile, and it was out of the Sanford Hospital Systems, which I believe is in your neck of the woods.
Yep. There is sorry if you can hear sirens in the back.
I didn't know if it was me or you.
No, that's me. They'll be gone in a second. Yeah, and yeah, Profile is. I mean, they're all over, but Sanford's up based out of this area, and so I never did Sanford. But so I did basically what this diet was. It was meal replacement bars and shakes, and then for like actual meals, it would be prepackaged like frozen meals, and it was okay. It was very restrictive, and vegetables. I lost a lot of weight. I lost like 75, 100 pounds in just a few months doing it, partially because I'd have to go and get weighed every Wednesday. So every Wednesday we have to go, we have to meet as a group and we get weighed in. I have to get weighed in front of everyone. And my ego is such that I refuse to let myself show up and gain weight when everyone was going to see it. And so I really white knuckled it through that and I lost a lot of weight. I'm convinced I lost a lot of muscle as part of that because I wasn't doing any sort of resistance training or working out. I was just losing weight very quickly. So, which is why when people say GLPs cause muscle loss, no, they don't. Losing weight quickly causes muscle loss if you don't take steps to solve for it with protein and resistance training. I moved to Seattle or to Eastern Washington after that, and I gained 100 pounds back in maybe 2 or 3 months. It all immediately came back.
Yeah.
And it came back, I guarantee, as mostly fat, whereas I previously probably lost fat and muscle. And that was the turning point for me, where my weight gain started increasing much more quickly after that. My mobility suffered dramatically. Many folks who are listening to this know what it's like to be in a very big body going out in public. Things like, am I going to break a chair? Can I fit in a booth at a restaurant? If you rent a car, are you going to fit in the rental car? All of that stuff was difficult for me. It was compounded dramatically when I moved over to Europe for work. Because while Europe also has issues with obesity, it's not like it is in the US. And so people there are just generally a little bit smaller than in the US when it comes to weight anyway. And that's where mobility became extremely difficult for me and affected my life all the time. I was traveling for work 250, 275 nights a year. So spending a lot of time on the road and traveling, which is brutal. 600 pounds.
So at 600 pounds, you were doing travel like 3/4 of the year?
I was traveling constantly. I was on airplanes constantly. So I almost think I could start a consulting firm that just consults for big people how to travel.
Yeah.
Because I'd have to really navigate how do I make sure that I get a seat that fits me. Probably the worst part.
Can I ask you how did you? Because even I want to say at my highest was about 319, and I was doing a lot of travel for work too. And I just got to a point where I would only sit in first class because I knew how uncomfortable I was going to be and how uncomfortable the person next to me was going to be if they got stuck next to me. And I just couldn't deal with that. And I finally just it was just going to be first class the
Yeah.
whole way because that seat would fit me.
Generally, on US based airlines, I couldn't even fit in first class. First class was way too small for me. I would always have to do two seats. In Europe, I could do first class because first class in most European airlines is actually there's still a middle seat. They just don't sell it.
Mm.
So you have a little extra space. So I would do first class there, or I would buy two seats. And occasionally, if I couldn't do that, and I would buy the second seat often at my own expense,
Yeah.
even if I was traveling for work, because I did not. I mean, to talk to HR or your boss and say like I'm too big here and I need you to pay for this stuff is embarrassing.
Oh, oh, that breaks my
Um,
heart for you.
but the probably the most difficult part of traveling at that size is I am aware that at 600 plus pounds, or even maybe 500 plus pounds, and I'm 6'2", 6'3". I'm actually 6'3", but my doctor says I'm 6'2" now, which makes me incredibly angry that my doctor's I blame GLPs for making me shorter, but um, the the biggest humiliations I've had in my life usually come in airports
Mm-hmm.
because at that size particularly, because I would be a sweaty mess, like just walking everywhere. But I lost count of the number of times people would sneak my picture. I would see people
Oh,
taking my picture because I'm aware at 600 plus pounds, especially in Europe, I was probably the biggest person that anyone had ever seen, like in real life.
mm.
And the fact that people were, I remember one in particular, this guy, I was at the boarding area and his camera was sort of down between his legs, but it was like pointed up right at me and I was just a few feet away. And I just looked at him and I just said, "What are you doing? Like, I know what
Mm.
you're doing." So, and he looked down and didn't acknowledge it, but uh, or I walking through airports, you'd see people sitting by each other. How many people would sort of nudge the person next to them and point at me like I
Mm.
like in addition to having obesity, I apparently am also blind and I can't see what you're doing.
Mm.
And so people would take pictures or they'd kind of point at me. Sometimes they would just say things to me. And then even if someone is not, even you traveling at 300 plus or others who are bigger, the feeling of sitting on the airplane and people looking at you as they're walking down the aisle. And I would see looks of terror in the
Right.
boarding area and on the plane because I know what they're thinking. I've gone through my life as a mind reader because for the last 20 years, I know exactly what people are thinking when they first see me.
Mm.
And I'm not angry at people for it. I get it. We're human beings. When you see something different than you, your reaction is to, you ponder it for a second.
Mm.
But the look of terror that people like, please don't let me sit next to this person. And because I typically would have two seats, when people would realize that they were in my row, people would look mad, like angry.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
they would sit down, and I would always lean over, and if I had two seats, which typically I did, and I would just say, just so you know, no one's going to be sitting here. And I would just see total relief on their face. And then joy, because now they get to be the only other person on the airplane that has a seat next to them that's open. So now it's like, it's a good thing that they're next to me at that point.
Mm.
Um, but it was incredibly hard emotionally, mentally, at that size, traveling as much as I did for that reason. Just the constant humiliations on
What
top
did
of
you what did
physical.
you do with all that humiliation? Like it goes somewhere, right? Like how did you cope with it?
I I stopped being social. I just hid away. Unless I had to be somewhere, I
Mm.
didn't go anywhere. Whether that was in Europe or in the U.S., where friends would want to go out or family would want to go out, and I would find, I'd always have an excuse that I can't go. I have a
Mm.
work meeting or whatever.
Which
On
as somebody who, like we talked about at the beginning, gets energy and feeds off of the interpersonal relationships and the physical presence or at least emotional presence of other people is a double whammy because now you're forced into this life of isolation. And some people go, "Oh, that would be ideal if I just never had to see a person and I could just, like some people do prefer that. That doesn't seem to be the way that you're wired. So I think that's Like just it's incredibly sad to think about somebody being sort of forced into that life.
Yeah, it was sad, but I tell you, I didn't feel sad or depressed at the time. It was just my life. Like that was just my reality every day. Um, and I I tell you, I wish in 2021, right after COVID, I was on a flight from Seattle back to North Dakota, and there was a woman right next to me. There wasn't a shared seat. So I was crowded next to her, and this was my absolute heaviest weight. Was early 2021, and I felt so bad that I was crowding this woman because it was just like a 2-seat row, and she was very kind to me, and she brought up and she said that she was a doctor. She was an endocrinologist, and this would have been May 2021. And she got to talking to me, and she just sort of knew that I was be okay having this conversation. And she brought up my size, and she asked, she's like, "Have you sought any medical care?" You know, because I told her, I said, "I'm really big. I'm sorry," and I said I had not. And she mentioned at that point, she said, there are new medications coming out now or soon to come out that rival bariatric surgery in terms of their success. And she told me, she said, you really should consider this. And she gave me her card and told me that when I was back in town, I should contact her office and set up an appointment with her. And I didn't do that. And I wish I had. I didn't start GLP-1 medications for 2 years after that.
Do you still have her card?
I do have her card.
Have you
I have
reached
not,
out?
but I'm going to reach out, particularly when I'm out in Seattle soon. I want to one, thank her for her kindness, but the fact that at that moment I realized, okay, maybe there's something out there, and I just wasn't ready for it. And the reason I didn't call her is the same reason I never pursued bariatric surgery in my life, which is this belief, this that many understand, which is I can do this on my own, quote unquote. I don't need help on this. Like I've been successful in many other aspects of my life.
Before you know about the science behind this stuff, there really is, a feeling of nobility of I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I think that we get frustrated with the world for not understanding that. But I think I kind of alluded to this earlier. We I think are sometimes the biggest barrier for getting ourselves help because we don't feel like we deserve it, or we feel like we're morally flawed if we need assistance.
Yeah. It's because, I mean, part of it's the culture that many of us have grown up in. I'm of the age where, in the 80s and 90s, it was low fat foods. And if you eat high fat foods, that's the reason that you're overweight. And instead they're, just pumping sugar into everything to make up for the
right.
And actually made the problem significantly worse. There is, I think people, and there are many who still have this nobility. I'll be on, I've really gotten into TikTok and I have these lives and, I'll have 50 or 100 or 300 people in there at times. And I'm trying to talk, and we'll talk about my mindset shift, because I think the mindset shift is a critical component here in addition to the physical aspects. And folks, generally men, who say, I've done it the natural way. I've lost whatever weight natural way. And, I'm happy for them. I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah.
But it's not like because you did it without medication or surgery, it doesn't make you as a person more worthy of anything than me. Apparently the disease of obesity in my case is worse than it is in your case.
Or I think, the reality is, and I don't ever want to be a naysayer because I get the same things in my lives and in my comments. I don't want to be a naysayer to those people, but I do want to remind people that obesity is a chronic relapsing disease.
Yeah.
And I have lost 50 pounds, 75 pounds at different times in my life too, but it's always come back. Yep. And I think, not to say, I don't ever want to say to those people, well, talk to me in 2 years. But in the back of my mind, I'm going, I hope this person is as confident about what they're saying and would say the same thing to me in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, because I know what it's like to live with the disease. And I think the interesting thing, somebody said, I'm stealing this from somebody, but somebody at one point said, I've lost 500 pounds. And they go, I've lost 100 pounds 5 different times, but I've lost 500 pounds in my lifetime. And I'd never thought about that cumulatively, I have probably lost 500 pounds also. But the disease is relapsing, and it's relapsing because of oftentimes broken biology.
Yeah. And all it takes is a bad circumstance, an injury to yourself that slows you down or stops you. You know, I lost a significant amount of weight in the early 2000s with the Atkins diet. I don't know how old you are, Dave, but that was all the rage.
I,
You do
I
Atkins
did
diet?
I did the same thing in about 2003.
That's the exact same time I did it, and I
Yep.
did it. It went well. I didn't love it because I don't like eating huge chunks of meat all the time like you had to on that diet. But I ended up hurting myself. I was working out. I was doing it well. I ended up hurting myself in the gym. Didn't go to the gym, and at that point, I'm like, well, I can't work out anymore. So I stopped doing the Atkins thing, and then it just like a wave just comes right back at you.
Yeah. Yeah, my problem is and I wrote about this a little bit in my book. I talked a little bit about my story, but the problem with the Atkins diet for me was that it worked. And I when I went off it, it was kind of like the same story as you shared earlier. Um, when you stopped the medical weight loss program that you were involved in, it came back, and it came back with a vengeance. The low carb did that to me too, but I went back to the well every single year for a period of months trying to get it to work again like it did the first time. And every year it seems like there was a waning effect in its ability to help me lose weight. And yeah, my life has been a roller coaster since I was introduced to the Atkins diet.
Absolutely. And I actually am going to make a post about this, and I recorded this video about it yesterday. What is unique about GLP-1 relative to all the other things I've tried before is this is the first time where I feel fully in control. I feel like I'm in control of what I choose to eat and how I choose to eat and how I choose to
Mm-hmm.
move. And even prior to this, I was doing all these other things, these diets to lose weight. I never fully felt like I was in control. I felt like the diet was in control.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to stick to that thing that had control. Now that the food noise is gone, uh, I get to decide. And I could choose to still eat poorly. And that's what people think. They think that the GLP-1 treatment is, and I always say treatment or support is what it is. I don't even like calling it a medication. Um, it it frees your mind to live how you choose to live. So there's some folks who take these medications who don't lose any weight, and for some it doesn't work at all. But there may be some where like they're choosing to eat poorly still, and that's something that they can work on in terms of getting better if it's not working for them all that well. I can still choose to eat poorly, but GLP-1s just like you say, they've leveled the metabolic playing field. So
Mm-hmm.
now, just like someone who doesn't have obesity can still gain weight, um, someone with obesity now can gain weight even if they're on these medications. It's completely changed my life in every way. There is no aspect of my life that has not significantly improved over the last 3 years. I
Mm-hmm.
can't think of a single thing that's not better.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
amazing. Yeah.
that's why I
You've got your
appreciate
life
your
back.
advocacy. Oh, sorry, that's what I said. I appreciate your advocacy and now my advocacy and others for those people who either don't want to use medication, they don't think they have to, and they will likely regain the weight. They do not yet know that this is something that they need,
Yeah.
and at some point they may need it, and they need people like you and I and others in the community to speak out to make sure that when they need it, or at least when they acknowledge that they need it, they have access to it.
Right. Right. Accessibility continues to be the number one topic that all roads return to. Um, in terms of it's hard to separate out where the news ends and the advocacy begins for what we're doing here at On the Pen. But everything goes back to accessibility, um, and the fact that so many people are still priced out of these medications. Why at the beginning of our conversation, we are talking about the release the vials. It's great, but you know, at the same time, can't really take a victory lap on it because it's still $500 a month, and that leaves a lot of people on the margins. It pushes, and with the going away of at least the mass produced compounds, I'll say that the compounds are, a little bit harder to get, or maybe some people are a little weary about taking, the kind that are mixed with something else. I don't know. With the essentially copies of the branded medications gone and the more affordable versions gone or not as readily available, it's pushing so many people to just desperate places. And I really do worry about what the long-term impact on some people's health is with some of the things that they're injecting into their body out of desperation.
Yeah, and I have an insane amount of privilege in that my insurance covers GLP-1s for me. So I can only imagine what it must be like if you were someone out there who is such desperate need for this that you're willing to order something online that's sent to you, powder that's sent to you, that you figure out, how do I mix this stuff myself? And you don't really know where it is, and you're injecting your body, and it's just a scary proposition. And it's dangerous, but it makes things like compound pharmacies appear to be sketchy sometimes when maybe they're not, because it all gets lumped together.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is that with the Release the Vials campaign, and you're the preeminent expert on what's coming out. My hope is that as new medications come out, the free market starts to kick in a bit more than it has been, causing the prices for things like Wegovy and Zepbound to be lower, to a point when insurance companies see the cost benefit to actually paying for these things. And I understand why insurance companies aren't paying for it now, because they're only going to have you for a couple of years, and someone else is going to another company is going to reap the benefits of it, and eventually they're going to kick everyone off to Medicare, and so then it's Medicare's problem for all your medical issues. But my hope is that if they get down to that $200 or $300 a month price point, at that point maybe insurance companies will start covering it.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful. I just feel like the market is already there, and I feel like we have had some unique market forces that previously patented breakthrough medications haven't had, and that's because of the shortage that has allowed compounds to create a secondary market for these medications. I really do believe that compounders should be credited for the fact that we are seeing a cash pay option of Zepbound, for the fact that we are seeing now a cash pay option for Wegovy. What I believe will happen within the next 6 to 8 months is I believe Novo Nordisk will be forced to lower the cost of Wegovy.
Oh yeah,
because there's just too much data out there on the superiority of Zepbound, and the fact that Lilly has been willing to give them to patients in the single dose vials. They should be able to keep up with demand in a way that Novo and the pens may struggle with. And so I'm just hopeful that the market forces that exist currently will lead within the next 6 to 8 months to a dramatic reduction in the cost of Wegovy, which, I think, semaglutide as a first line treatment ain't a bad first line treatment. 15%, 16% reduction in body weight for non-diabetic folks is pretty dramatic change for most people.
That, and obviously CVS Caremark recently dropping Zepbound and forcing people to Wegovy. I talked to people who understandably upset. I would be upset too. I use Zepbound. I would be upset if I lost it as well. That said, if Zepbound didn't exist, Wegovy or semaglutide would be the greatest weight loss invention ever for medicine. And so it is very much human nature to want the best thing. And if you get the second best thing, it's normal to feel it's just not good enough. And I don't want to ever tell anyone how to feel, but if it were me and I lost the best thing, but I still had insurance paying for the second best thing, I would still feel a little bit like I won the lottery when it comes to this stuff, because there are many people who don't have access whatsoever.
Right.
And my hope is that at some point with things like maintenance, it can be incredibly helpful for maintenance at a low price at that point.
Absolutely. I'm hopeful. We'll see change. Like we talked about, we got vials. The community pushed for that. I think it's maybe a little bit of a heavier lift to get prices down. But again, I think if we see prices come down meaningfully on Wegovy, I don't think it's the competition between Lilly and Novo that did it. I think it's the competition from the compounders that did it. And I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to the compound pharmacies for sort of fulfilling their role, especially the 503Bs during the shortage, and doing it so well that it created this environment that drove prices down. And I hope the whole system will get relooked at. I just finished recording the podcast just a few minutes before we sat down. I was recording today's podcast, and I'm very cautiously optimistic that we have members from both parties talking about the same things. You have the executive branch moving with executive orders, and then you have the legislative branch moving to codify it, and you've got different parties involved on both sides. So you see RFK wants to ban ads. I don't know how much that does to drive down the price ultimately, but I think it's an interesting proposition. You have Senator Sanders introducing legislation in the Senate to do the same thing. You have Trump's executive order on most favored nation pricing. You have Representative Ro Khanna in California, Democratic congressperson, moving to introduce legislation that's basically a carbon copy of that executive order. So, like, we're not only saying we want the same thing, we're actually, different branches. Now, can they work together is where the super cautiously optimistic comes in. But it seems like there's an appetite for change if we can be loud enough and push hard enough.
Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out, and Dave's not paying me to say this. I'm going to say it anyway. I learn about all this stuff because of your Substack. I encourage people to subscribe to your Substack. I'm a paid subscriber. I will be for life. I'll be a lifetime member of it because you are breaking news, but maybe I won't be for life, Dave. Actually, I hope I'm not a subscriber for life. I hope at some point the work you do, I hope you always find a career. I hope that this becomes obsolete because these treatments become just a standard part of life, that there doesn't need to be a Dave Knapp type person advocating and educating and breaking news. And that's my hope. I think that we're many years away from that, unfortunately. But I encourage people, if you are not yet, to go subscribe. One, because you get great info very quickly. But two, it also supports the work that you do. And the second thing that I would encourage people, because so many folks are starting on on this treatment on GLP-1 support now, and I see it on TikTok, particularly on TikTok or on Instagram, people are starting and they've not been educated by their providers frequently. And they show up like asking questions that I would expect a doctor to tell them. And one of the things I try to advise people is this is a tool and you should use it that way, but you also have to really change your mindset. And so for me, I've now lost 340 pounds, and my mindset shift was not as important as GLP-1, but just under, because I wouldn't be successful without both of those things happening. So I encourage people just to don't view it just as medication. Look at it as changing your life in other ways too.
Yeah, it's a tool in the tool belt towards combating the disease of obesity. I want to go back to something that you just said a minute ago, and I'm having a brain fart as to what it was.
People to pay to subscribe to your Substack.
That was it.
Back to that. There you go.
That was it. No. It was just in terms of new patients starting the medication. I think doctors, PCPs specifically, have gotten better about prescribing it because these are so much in the zeitgeist of American culture now that everybody knows somebody who lost a bunch of weight who is either open about being on a GLP-1 or they're accused of it, which I hate. But, it's everybody knows somebody's lost weight using GLP-1 at this point, including doctors. So I think they're less afraid to prescribe it because they're like, hey, it really worked really well for this other patient of mine, or I know somebody, so they're not afraid to prescribe it. But definitely the guidance on what to do in addition to taking the medication and how to live on the medication and thrive on the medication, that still lags tremendously. I actually I told you I just got done with the podcast, but I actually lied. I got done with the podcast, and then I was on the phone for like 10 minutes with a personal friend who just started Manjaro. And he's going to pick up his box, and I've been navigating the insurance process with him, like, here's what to expect next, and and every step of the way I'm giving him information that his doctor just didn't. And now he's to the point where he's about to take it. What can he expect? And so I guess long-winded way of saying, I think for the near term, there's 100 million people in this country that could benefit from these medications. That's a lot of people that need a lot of help from the community. And that's why I always get excited to see new, vibrant, vocal people willing to share their journey and willing to share their struggles, so that somebody out there, I think every time you make a TikTok video or every time you go live over there, you're talking to somebody on the other end of that phone who is you 2 years ago or back in 2021. And that's going to move the needle for them. And so I encourage everybody who has a story to tell and who is willing and comfortable to do it. Just get on and share and build your own little community. And the more people that do that, I think there's also the caveat of do it responsibly, because some people don't do it super responsibly. But as long as you're not giving medical advice and you're just sharing your story and helping to remove the stigma, I think we could see a day where OnThePen is sort of, and to a greater extent, the disease of obesity are less of a part of the conversation, because they're just very treatable, like anything else.
Yeah, I hope for that, and I agree. I've only been posting now for less than a couple months, and I'm finding connection with a lot of people, because in my case, there are people out there who I'm speaking to that no one has spoken to them yet.
Mm.
There are way more people that won't connect with me, but they might connect with you, the person that's listening to this right now, and you have a story to tell. I was never going to speak about this publicly. I didn't even tell friends or family the first few months I was on this. I was never going to speak publicly, because
Do you think it was like that lingering stigma that kept you from starting it in the first place? It was just still there. Like, it's a weakness that I'm on this medication. I'm not willing to share that. Or why do you think it is? Because you seem like the kind of guy who's going to share anything you're excited about.
Yeah. I absolutely think it was feelings of, at least when I started, one, I don't think I'd said anything right away to even my closest friends or family, other than one person, because I felt if this doesn't work for me, I don't want people around me to know that the one thing that's supposed to work for you didn't work for me. But then it started to work for me. But I wasn't going to talk about it because reputation. I have a reputation that I thought would be damaged by admitting a vulnerability, that I have this thing called obesity, and the only thing that fixes it for me is a medication, or at least the thing that opens the door to allow me to fix this is a medication. And so it came down to pride and ego more than anything, and I can acknowledge that now. I have had a successful business career. I'm also have been very active in politics, and at least in North Dakota, I'm a relatively public figure in the political world, appearing interviewed in radio shows, and I give 100 speeches a year. And so I was worried that would become a problem. But as I started to see the success of this, and listening to all of the myths and disinformation about these medications out there, I began to get really upset that here I am, someone who actually has a little bit of a platform and has some credibility, and I'm sitting here silently while other people say it's the easy way out. Well, I go lift weights 4 days a week, and I eat 250 plus grams of protein a day, and I now walk 12,000 steps a day, and there's nothing easy about any of that. So to sit by silently and let people trash others who were more vocal than me, and I'd said, no, I'm just going to speak out about it. And I cannot begin to explain how incomprehensible it is that I now am creating TikTok videos. One, I'm not a social media guy at all. But the fact I'm creating TikTok videos and going on podcasts and saying out loud that I used to weigh over 650 pounds, which that number for a long time was the thing that made me more ashamed than anything else. That number, I had so much shame tied to that number.
Mm-hmm.
Like many people listening to this know the shame of that high number. And now I view that number as a badge of honor because the 650-pound version of me was stronger and braver than I am because
Mm-hmm.
I had to get through life like that.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was the one who got help and admitted I couldn't do this on my own, quote unquote. And so I have a heck of a lot of respect for me at 650. And I now no
Mm-hmm.
longer view that number as something to be ashamed of. I'm proud of that number. That number allows me to grab someone's attention that I wouldn't be able to grab otherwise. And while I have their attention for those few seconds, I can maybe tell them something that is going to help them lose some weight. Or if they don't have weight issues, is maybe going to help them be a little bit more understanding or empathetic for those of us who do struggle with obesity.
I love that so much. I I will often find myself scrolling through my feed, whether it's Instagram or TikTok, and I'll see a video where somebody will be doing the quintessential before and after transformation, and you know, this person was this and this and this and this, and now I'm this and this and this, and every time I see that, I sort of I'm saddened a little bit because that before person had just as much intrinsic value and worth and
Yes.
contribution as the new person or transformed person. And it does take a tremendous amount of mental toughness. I always say, Jamie, I don't know if you've ever heard me say this before, but I think the obesity community in general is one of the most underrated communities in all of human history in terms of what they can accomplish. Because I think that that's just people's view of obesity, is that you're obese because you're lazy and you don't have discipline and you don't know how to work. Yet here we are, I'm talking about being on a diet for the last essentially 20 years of my life, off and on. You were carrying around 650 pounds of body weight at one point and still a functioning member of society somehow with, I don't think people can possibly grasp just even physically what that feels like to just do normal physical human activities at
Yeah.
that weight. And so what develops in us is this kind of mental toughness that doesn't get forged easily for most people. But since that's been our experience, we have this thing within us that is almost like superhuman. It's so rare. And that's why um, the biggest takeaway for me with the release the vials thing was just, this community should not put a governor or a limiter on what we think we can accomplish. Because when we all move in the same direction together towards something, we have so much power, and there's so many in this community ready to do the work. And so that gets me excited for the future and for these conversations about price and accessibility, because I know that if we can all move together, we can move mountains.
Yeah. And I agree. I say this all the time. It does not matter your size. Everyone is worthy of love and respect and compassion and empathy. It does not matter what their size is. Uh, your worth is not tied to a number on the scale. And in terms of what it's like to be that size, there physically, there is nothing that I do now, whether I be like, I worked out today, I had like a tough day in the gym today, or I walk a ton. There's nothing that I do physically that is even in the realm of how hard it is to be 600 plus pounds. Like it doesn't even compare. So when people are like, wow, you must be tough in the gym, I'm like, no, the gym is a cakewalk compared to an average day at 600 plus pounds.
Mm.
And that is something that I think, to your point, a lot of people who don't have the struggle don't quite understand. Would they see someone and say that they're lazy, that they're that big because they're lazy? But that person getting up and getting dressed and getting out and walking to the mall or through a grocery store, it's significantly harder than it is for most. And they don't quite understand that. But that's why they need folks like us to talk about it.
100%. 100%. Well, I love what you're doing, Jamie, and I've loved the chance to sit down and get to know you and to get to know your story a little bit more. For anybody who's watching today, where is the best place that they can go find you and connect with your content?
Yeah, probably the best place would be TikTok. You can just search for my name. It's on TikTok, or Jamselz, Jamselz, or just search for my name on there. And I try to post a few times a day. And really, I'm focused on mindset. So how do you set goals? How do you approach things? How do you use these? How do you use this tool that we've been given to change your mind? I try to do that. You can also search for me on Instagram or Facebook as well. I've very much valuing connecting with people through this whole process and this journey. And I encourage, to your point, I encourage anyone out there who feels like they have a story to tell, but they think that no one cares. Please tell your story, because you will connect with someone. I've connected with people and I've heard feedback, things I never imagined. I thought I was just going to make some videos and people might find them helpful or useful. I have gotten feedback that I did not expect, and I think that it's not unique to me. I think I'm changing lives for some specific people, just like you are, Dave. And if you're listening to this, you can have that same effect on someone. Someone out there is waiting to hear your voice, and you owe it to them to share your voice. Mm-hmm. And in my case, if you're interested in what I have to say, find me on TikTok, and I'm happy to help or provide any support there.
Awesome. Jamie, it's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit today. I would love to come back and have this conversation again in 6 months or a year and just catch up again. I hope that we get the chance to do that. Thank you so much for giving some of your time to OnThePen today, and for all the kind words that you gave me. As you just said, you can't believe it when people tell you that your content has helped them in a certain way. I feel that every time somebody says something like you have said today. It's just information. You hope it's useful, but we underestimate the work that we do sometimes. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing, Jamie. It's great to meet you.
Thanks so much, Dave. I appreciate it. I will likely be at the OAC conference in July in DC. So if anyone out there sees me, please come up and say hi. And Dave, thank you sincerely for all the work you've done, and congratulations on Release the Vials. I know you're just getting started, but what a fantastic start you've had. So keep up the good work, please.
Appreciate that, Jamie. Thanks so much.